Thank you very much. I'll give this short talk as a former liberal who became an orthodox monarchist. So that's my background, if you like. I think most people would agree that the main geopolitical problem at this moment is the conflict between liberal democracy and what is called orthodox autocracy. Now, it seems to me the main thing which is missing here is an understanding of orthodox autocracy, because we confuse several things with orthodox autocracy. We confuse Chinese communism on the one hand, and Iranian Islamism, and other kinds of tyrannical, despotic rule. And no one talks about the real, in my view, the only real orthodox autocracy, which is orthodox. Orthodox. And I just want to make 4 points about the contrast between these two systems. One is about one-man rule against many-man rule. It's an obvious difference. Another is about checks and balances. That is, the liberals are very proud of having checks and balances on rule. And they claim that the orthodox autocracy does not have that. I don't agree with that. Then there is the question of what is above the law. The liberals tend to accuse all other forms of government of being above the law or pretending to be above the law, whereas they themselves are below the law. I think this is completely false, and I'll try and explain why. And then there's the last thing. What is the main value of liberal democracy on the one hand and orthodox autocracy on the other? And I would say the difference is between freedom on the part of the liberals and truth on the part of the orthodox autocrats. So just a few words about each of these, because there won't be time for any more. First, about one-man rule against many-man rule. Well, obviously, the autocrats have one-man rule, whereas the liberals claim to be democrats, and therefore they have a many-headed rule, if you like. But it's interesting that the more that liberal democracy progresses, the more it tends towards one-man rule. We see this especially in time of war. For example, you look at, say, my country of Britain in the First World War. By the end of the First World War, it was ruled by 5 people, basically. And it was not one-man rule, but it was oligarchical rule. The same in the Second World War, where Churchill and his cabinet, again, ruled without much democracy involved. So, whereas in orthodoxy, monarchy has always been seen as the one only possibility for Orthodox people. For example, St. Gregory the Theologian, like many other Orthodox fathers, said that democracy is for those who believe in many gods, that orthodoxy is for those who believe in one God. And then there's the oligarchy is for those who are not really for one or the other. So that's one difference I want to make out. So there's one-man rule and there's many-man rule. Now, checks and balances. The liberals say that the orthodox autocrats do not have any checks and balances, whereas they do. Well, the question is first, do they really have checks and balances? What happens if, for example, the people get control of and overturn the checks and balances? The checks and balances, of course, are political parties, a judiciary, an independent judiciary, and those two things mainly. Well, very recently, you may have noticed that in the United States, the judiciary passed a law which said that an American president in power is not subject to these checks and balances. So already the checks and balances in the American democracy, at any rate, have disappeared. Now, what about the Orthodox autocracy? Does it have checks and balances? Yes, it does. The Orthodox autocracy has the church. The church is the conscience of the autocrat. Of course, that means that the autocrat must be Orthodox. And that goes without saying. Orthodox autocracy must be when the autocrat is Orthodox. But if he is Orthodox, then he has a check and balance, and a very strong check and balance. Because if you look at the history of the Orthodox Church, you see that autocracies survive for long periods. Take here in Serbia, you had the Nemanja dynasty, which was a very effective and very well-governed autocracy in which the church and the state worked together very closely. And the state checked, the church checked the state, and the state helped the church. That is the symphony of powers, as the Emperor Justinian called it. This is the norm of Orthodox autocracy, and it implies checks and balances. That checks and balances coming from the church and the conscience of the people, the Orthodox conscience of the people. Now, we were talking about what is above the law and not above the law. Well, for Orthodox, for the liberal Democrats, their law is created exclusively by liberals. So, of course, they're not going to be above the liberal law, because the liberal law is themselves, it's their law. Whereas, in Orthodoxy, in the Orthodox autocracy, there is another law higher, which is the God's law and the church's law. And they are really higher. They are above the law, and they must be above the law. There's a very interesting statement by the poet Pushkin, who said, "Our Tsar has to be above the law." And he compared it with America at that time. He said, America, they're automata, whereas we have one man who can decide what is done in a Christian way and in a human way, whereas in America they are automata, he said. So he preferred the Russian autocracy, although he himself suffered to some extent from the Orthodox autocracy, to the American system, which he thought was automata. Now, I just come to the last point I want to make. This is, what is the ultimate freedom, what is the ultimate value of liberal democracy on the one hand and Orthodox autocracy on the other? Well, in the case of liberal democracy, it's quite obvious, it's freedom. They talk about freedom all the time. From the time of the Renaissance to the present time, the liberals are proud of their democracy, their freedom. Whereas they say the Orthodox forget about freedom. They have people like Ivan the Terrible. Well, let us answer that. The Orthodox have never been against freedom. They want freedom as much as possible, but they have something higher than freedom. That freedom is truth. That truth has been given to them through the Orthodox Church down the ages, and that has to be preserved. And that has to be preserved by all means possible. Therefore, the Lord himself said quite clearly, he said, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." In other words, first comes the truth, then comes freedom. And in another place he says, if you follow righteousness, then all the rest will be given to you. In other words, you follow the law of God, and then other things like prosperity and freedom will be given to you. If they're not given to you, there must be a reason for it. Maybe God has not allowed you to have freedom because you don't deserve it, or because you need to be punished in some way by God. This, I think, is the most important difference. This is why I believe in Orthodox autocracy, because it is the only system which first has the truth, because it's orthodoxy, and I am an Orthodox Christian, and second, its whole system is designed to preserve the truth, to keep it forever. Thank you very much.
Thank you.